Hey there, everybody. I'm Mike DeLisio.
I'm Chris Yee.
And I'm Wendy Yee.
And today we're going to be taking a look at Daitoshi. This is the newest game from DeVere Games in the Kamushi saga, as it's come to be known. It's kind of this shared universe, and I'm going to consult the rule book here that has an actual chronology. Chris and Wendy, we're aware of this, right? A chronology.
This is more organized than the Legend of Zelda series, which had multiple
which
chronologies.
branches off in different directions.
Yes, that's very true. So in the chronology, although not in the necessarily when it came out, Bitoku is first, okay, which we've all played, yes. Yokai Sketch, which I have not played.
I've not played.
No, I think Z and Milla did that one.
Okay, Bamboo, played that. Mm-hmm. Silk. I actually have not played Silk.
Yeah, funny enough.
Neither have I.
Yeah.
Oh.
Daitoshi, which we better have played, and Sand, which I think all three of us have played as well, yeah?
Yeah, so the timeline, what is that? Like, does the world change across the time? Like, I don't really understand.
It's the industrial boom right now.
Yeah, I think there are some little thematic things in there, but we're going to get to theme in a moment. First, let's let Wendy show us how to play this game.
In Daitoshi, players are going to be taking turns moving around this rondel, taking actions, powering cities, and doing all that kind of stuff, while also taking use or exploiting the natural resources, which are these tiles up here. And as they exploit, they're going to take them off, they're going to place them on their board, and nothing bad is going to happen. In fact, we'll get some good stuff. We'll get some extra workers. We'll get some abilities. But if we ever over-exploit any particular resource, which means we'll have two of them or more, then bad stuff happens. And so in this game, we're trying to manage the 4 different types of natural resources without over-exploiting them. And so when bad stuff happens, you would end up losing abilities, and there's actually tiles on your board that flip over and the benefits on them become less. So you actually get negative stuff if you overexploit. But there are ways to remove these and to kind of maintain this area. Now the goal of the game is to get the most points, but the end game trigger has to do with these exploitation tokens up here. So these hexagons, whenever one of these 4 different hexagon tracks gets down to the second last space. So we've removed everything all the way to the second last space, and that's going to trigger the end game. And so we do want to exploit these. In fact, every action that you take on this rondel is going to have you exploit. You just don't want to overdo it. It's very much a management of exploitation game. So let's talk about what you can actually do on your turn. So you can either choose to move your worker onto this rondel and take an action, or you can choose to come over here and to produce. Now, if you choose to take a production action, this is something that everybody's going to do. So there are pink check marks and there are blue check marks. And as you take a production action, I'm going to actually flip this over and pretend that we didn't do that. So as you take a production action, if you are the one who leads it off, so you're the one who instigates it, you get to activate all your blue and pink check marks. So over here, this is the only invention I have so far, and so far I have 1 blue and 1 pink check mark, so I would get 2 wild tokens. If later on in the game I've been able to move this up, because as we move along, we're going to be moving these cubes on these tracks, and one of those spaces is to move it up, then I will have access to more. So if I were to instigate, I would get 2 wilds and energy and 1 point. Now, when you take a production turn, you do have to pay the costs at the bottom, and one of the exploitation negatives is that those costs can get more expensive. You can choose to place inventions that you get throughout the game anywhere. You just always have to place them bottom to the top, and so you can choose to move right, or you can choose to move horizontally or vertically as you play. So let's talk about this action wheel over here. It's a little bit busy, but they are these little action wedges, and I have it a little bit crooked. I apologize. So there's these little wedges like this, and each one of these wedges is going to have a worker placement spot, which is this area over here. It's going to have a place to place meeples and gain extra abilities if you happen to have that colored meeple. it will have a main action and an exploitation tile that you take. So once again, this is an exploitation that you have to take from these rows up here. And when you get them, you get a benefit, which is great. But if you have too many, then it becomes a problem. And then it shows whatever the main action is over there. Up here in the top left-hand corner, this is going to be a bonus if you are someone that powers it, and that's going to be one of the actions you can take. And powering it will actually flip it over. So you would take, you would spend electricity, you would take the bonus, and you would flip it over. And this will actually upgrade the abilities that are on it for the meeples workers. Okay, so let's talk about the actual worker placement part first. So players can move up to 2 spaces, and then they can pay additional steam to move further. But when they move, they'll choose to move either to one of the first 2 actions if they want to place a meeple, or the bottom one, which means you cannot take the meeple actions down here. The first one is going to remove any meeples that were there previously because they do get in the way. And then the second one is just if it's open, if there's a spot where you have a meeple you can place it there. So that's what those 3 little areas are. And it is very much a first come, first serve. So if these 2 people are over here and I'm trucking along here and I decide that I want to take a turn here, I have to go to that first space. I have to play the 2 steam because that's the only available space. All right, so I briefly mentioned the power action. That's this action over here. There's also additional actions that you can take. There's this little house one over here, which adds these bands onto the board. And what they'll do is they'll actually create more action spaces for the little workers. And they will expand. And these are also things, oops, that's a small region. These are also things that can be powered. So if they're powered, they have a benefit. And then they add the extra meeple. And this is also one of the main ways that you're going to get rid of these exploitation tiles. So as you place it out, you're actually going to place the exploitation tile on this little spot here. And then it has this fire bonus, which means that you get to trigger the fire bonus for that exploitation tile. Another one of the actions you're going to want to do is actually down here. So it is this little gear symbol and it's connected down here. And this is to commit to invention. So this is the way to get more of these inventions. You can spend food and you can place them on your board. Like I said, they go either bottom to top. You can move vertically or you can move horizontally. And progressively, once again, as these cubes go by, when you get to this little arrow, you can bump them up so you can get greater and stronger abilities. If you notice, there are not any pink check marks anywhere except for on the bottom row. So that means that you'll only get these. Well, you can always get these, but you can't get extra when you instigate yourself. All right, the last action on the board is this over here, and this is going to actually be trading. And that is what this purple stuff is down here that you can't quite see. And what this is you are spending the pocket watch resource, which is this resource over here, and you're going to, let me see if I can move it up a little bit. Nope, I can't even get to it so you guys can see it. But you're going to be spending those resources to be able to get points and to be able to place out flags up here. And then the flags are actually going to be a reaction that you can spend. For example, this says that if you take one of these mountain exploitations, you can spend a flag if you have one, and then you can gain these abilities. You can move up on the yellow track, you can gain a yellow worker, and you can gain one of the yellow energies over here. Then, if you happen to interact with the airship, it's going to be moving around counterclockwise on the board. You can actually choose to come over here and use this board. So there is this little meeple spot over here, which will progressively get stronger, so you'll get more bonuses. Initially, it just starts with whatever this bottom bonus is here. And this is all variable. It changes from game to game. But then you can also, in lieu of taking the main action that you're at, you can choose to take the airship action. And if you spend one of every resource plus a wild, you can actually choose to take one of these university inventions, and you can switch them out with another invention on your board. Now, it does have to be leveled up enough that it gets past this little white spot right there. I don't know if you can see that. But then your old invention will come up on the board and you will gain points and you'll gain some cool hat movement, which is just another track over here full of bonuses. And that's a good way to get points, as well as it's part of some end game scoring options. All right, let's last talk about the end game. So we have these tracks up here that you've been exploiting throughout the game. Like I said, the end game triggers when one of these gets to that second last spot. But this is going to be the main way that you're going to get points. So each one of these tracks has an end game multiplier. For example, this blue track over here is negative points for every single one of these exploitation spots that you actually have 2 or more, so you have it on the bad side. So it's negative points for over exploiting, and then it's positive points for every empty space that you have no exploitation tokens on whatsoever. So if I had this like this, I would get 9 times 3 points. So like I said, each one of these tracks has a different multiplier. We've got the universities, we've got your reputation track, how far you moved up on it. And then finally, what is the last one? The last one is how far the cubes that you've made all the way to the very end of their tracks, multipliers time that. So it's all just endgame multipliers there. So that's endgame points, as well as any resources and meeples that you have left over are going to be traded in. I think it's 2 to 1 or 3 to 1 for that. So there's going to be points that you're going to gain throughout the game, and then endgame points are mainly these tracks right here. All right, so that's the gist of Daitoshi. Let's go back to the studio and talk about what we think.
Okay, so Daitoshi, I think we can, or I'll say it and see if you agree. This is a fairly complex game with a lot of things going on.
Very hard to agree. I would say the closest comparison I could make would maybe be to like the T game series from Board and Dice. You know, very procedural, a lot of different areas to look, a lot of, it can be rewarding, but a lot.
I think procedural is a really good word for it, because as you are working through those action spaces that you take, you're like, okay, I'm coming here and I'm going to choose whether or not I'm going to pay my Steam, and then I'm going to choose whether or not I'm going to use my meeples, and then I'm going to choose my not excavation. What's the
Exploitation.
Exploitation. There you go. That's what I'm like going. And then I choose my action. You know what I mean? Like you have to do it. It's very, very procedural of a game. Yeah.
It is. And you were mentioning the T games. I was even thinking myself almost like a Lacerda game, in the sense that, I remember when I was going to be taught Lisboa, I was told, so really all you're doing is you're taking a card and you're playing a card, right? Well, here, all you're doing is you're taking an action out on the city board, or you're running your production engine. However, it's one of those two things, right? But each one of those things leads to this branching escapade of choices and considerations. And so while the turn structure, it doesn't seem too complex, right? Do this or do this. The procedural elements, I think, are what bring the complexity about. Because as you mentioned, Wendy, if you're talking about taking an action, right? Standard in Euro games, you're going to take an action. That's going to be part of a branching series of steps that you take. And as you also mentioned, there's a very procedural element to that. You're kind of moving in a rondel type of a fashion. I guess really rondel only in the sense that you're going in a circular kind of a motion. And there are other circular motions. There's really 3 circles within themselves, but we don't need to get lost in the woods. It's easy to get lost in the woods here. But yeah, there's a lot to consider for every turn. And that is, I think, what is kind of the fashion for Euro games now. So I think this definitely feels like it fits within the realm of modern, complex Euro games.
Yeah, I would say so, right? There's not going to be a ton of interaction in that middle board per se, but there are enough things in here that I really appreciate. When you place your workers onto the different spots available there, it can block what other people are planning to do. Well, they could pay, more to wipe those and make those actions available again to them, but you're going to cause more inefficiencies for other players to the point they might reconsider their turns. And then also the production action, the other option, right? Instead of doing the rondel part, you can say, okay, we're going to run the factory. Everyone gets the chance right then and there to also run the factory for a lesser benefit. I think it supersedes the tend towards multiplayer solitaire, but I agree with your assessment. Like it fits firmly in that very modern feeling, complex Euro game.
I feel like the interaction ramps up as the game progresses. So initially, when you take that that action to run your inventions and to be able to gain that income, your benefit percentage-wise is so much higher than it is later on in the game when you've built a lot more and people have all built a lot more. They get to run everything versus you being like, well, I get double the amount of resources you do. So I feel like you have to make those choices a little more carefully because you are just giving them points at that point. Whereas initially you're like, you get an extra energy. It's okay. I'm getting a couple wilds. And I feel like it's the same thing with the worker placement spaces. Early on in the game, you don't have a ton of meeples. And so a lot of the spaces are very open and there's just kind of this sense of openness. So you're like, I can go kind of anywhere. If I want to play a worker, that worker meeple, I can. If not, I'm fine. But then you get to those points later on in the game where everyone has a ton of meeples. They're filling up those spaces. And so someone takes that space that removes the meeples and then they fill it all right back up. And then you want to come in there right next. They're blocking that spot entirely. And so I feel like that interaction is there. It just is more towards the end of the game where you really feel it ramping up.
Yeah, I'm glad you actually mentioned that. Yeah, I agree with both of you here. Is that by saying it fits into the modern Euro, I wasn't really talking about the player interaction, but you're right, because that is also kind of a highlight of more recent Euros, is that they tend to skew more towards the multiplayer solitaire. I think there is a fair amount of interaction in this game, both in the ways that you mentioned. Also, you're going to be competing on scoring tracks, things along those lines. One thing I wanted to bring up while we're kind of talking about the mechanical element of the game is that I feel like this is a Euro game that has the potential for poor first impressions. And I think there's a couple of reasons why I feel that way. You may disagree, but I feel like number one, the element of the game where you are trying to kind of manage the things that are going to happen when you exploit a particular resource too often can be terribly punishing. And if you really don't kind of understand the whole kind of interlocking puzzle that you are faced with at the beginning of a game, you can really get yourself in a pretty deep hole relatively quickly just because you don't quite get how everything interconnects. Like, you can understand how the actions work and all of those types of things, but not really understand what it means in the larger picture. And so I feel like first-time players need to be aware that they may have a first game that feels really punishing, where they can't get things done that they want to get done because they're having to deal with the ramifications of exploiting a particular resource more than once. Because every time that you exploit a particular resource more than one time, it triggers some kind of a negative effect. You can reverse that by removing those tiles from your board, but it can be very, very punishing in that aspect. And the other reason why I think it could have a poor first impression is that I don't think that the scoring is terribly intuitive and it's a bit opaque. The way that you score at the end of the game is all tied into those tracks up at the top of the board. And there's not a lot of thematic help that you get in this game. And that's what I mentioned earlier about the theme, is that I love the look and the world in this game. But I don't think the theme particularly helps players at all. I don't feel many thematic connections between the actions and what you're doing. I think there's some incredibly clever design elements. Like, I love the way that you get steam by either getting coal or getting water. That's super clever. But I never really felt thematically that what I was doing tied into what was happening.
Yeah, I think that the only bit of theme that I really feel mechanically is that idea of we want to exploit a little bit versus a lot. And you mentioned that first play experience. Is I've come to realize playing this multiple times is that there are certain setups that are just kinder when it comes to exploitation, where it's much easier to get rid of those tiles. And then there are some setups where it is very difficult and it is very tight and you constantly feel in debt. And so I think this is one of those that you have to know that about yourself. If you don't like having games where you are constantly in debt and you're constantly struggling, this might not be the game for you. You can play it so that you are able to toe that line, but you got to make sure that you have it set up so that it is welcoming for that particular type of freedom.
Yeah, and that's not exactly the right, but yeah, I know exactly what you mean, right?
But it has that feeling of
like the game systems are kind of fighting against you. I think that's the most thematic part for me. And I think the least thematic part, Mike nailed on the head, is the tracks that you're moving along. It feels great to move on tracks in any game. And then you realize, oh no, I've spent a decent amount of time moving up the track that I have no scoring multiplier for because I don't understand why forests means the Mega Machine University special machines in my factory.
Yeah.
It's hard to kind of connect those. There is a very good player aid, and yes, if you're teaching someone, make sure to remind them, hey, refer to your player aid, look at the endgame scoring, and keep that in mind. It's kind of like Concordia, where you're playing and you're pulling levers and pushing buttons. This is so fun. How do we score again? Oh, something very different from what you're doing in games of sorts, right?
And it's not even written on the board. Like, I would hope that it would be there next to the tracks. You could be like, okay, that's right. This track does the cubes. Like the cubes that have all made it to the end of my inventions. Okay. But there's just nothing there to reference. I mean, there's a reference card, but I'm not looking at that on my second, third play, except for to figure out what the tracks score for.
Yeah, and I don't know if this is your experience, Mike, but I did find that the graphic design, like Wendy mentions, there's not a reminder of what each of the tracks multiply for. I like the look of this so much, but some of the graphic design is almost kind of overwhelming, trying to parse the actions and the spaces in the middle of the rondelle and everything. I don't know if that was your experience as well.
Yeah, I was going to mention, actually, if we want to, we can kind of dovetail into components, a little bit as well. I agree 100%, Chris. That's my biggest issue graphically with the game, is that just by nature of having a circular kind of way that you're laying out these tiles, you're always going to have some of them that are facing you, some not facing you, some upside down. That's not the end of the world, but the way that they are graphically designed, I agree. It's not. I think it could have been done better, because you're like, okay, so these are the three spots I can send my is it your magnate? I think your magnate to, or magistrate. I can't remember. These are the three spots, okay, and they all kind of do the same thing. Either I go here and I can't place a worker, or I spend a steam and I can place a worker, or I spend two and I clear everyone off there. So I get that. But you've got that, then you've got the exploitation, and again, all these have to be done in a very particular order. So I've got the exploitation there, and then I've got the action, okay? Normally you're focusing only on the action, but you got other things you have to worry about. And then you've got a huge area that's devoted to electrifying that particular tile, and that's going to be on pretty much all of them. I feel like they could have utilized that space that they had better. I don't really know why so much of each of those was devoted to the electrifying aspect when it's the same. Of course it'll change value. It'll have two in the center, and then four could be, or three or four could get bigger as they go out. But those are the only aspects. Otherwise, I think the production in the game is really, really, really good. Like the dual layer boards, the thick cardboard tiles that you're using. There's not a lot of cards in the game, but those are good quality as well. The wooden screen printed bits. I mean, this feels like a Kickstarter deluxe game, and it's a retail game. Beautiful, beautiful components, but agreed. That is particularly off a little bit off to me, and also some of the iconography I don't love.
I think specifically the action spaces for me, one thing that I struggle with is I struggle seeing the separation. So I wish there was some form of outline to them so that I could see the wedges of the pie more clearly. I agree with you, Mike, that the electrified bonuses are massively huge. They take up the majority of the tile, and they are not the main action. But then on top of that, I feel like we read left to right, and you're performing the actions right to left. And that
counterclockwise.
Yeah. So it just feels unintuitive. It feels backwards. It feels like I take this space, I should be able to take this action. But instead the action is the very last thing that you do. And so I feel like that combination makes it feel unintuitive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That being said, I do love the art. I love that it fits in with the Kamushi saga, but it does feel more industrial and the production. So yeah, I have some issues with the graphic design, the way that it helps with the usability, but I do think it's a gorgeous game. I want that to be perfectly clear.
Yeah.
Should we go ahead and kind of wrap this up in a bow?
I think we should.
All right, who wants to start it off?
I'll start it off. So my score here and my final thoughts, I'm giving this a rating of a 7.5. This is a very fun game. Very complicated. We haven't really even talked much about the Mega Machine that kind of goes around the outside of the board. There's a lot of aspects to this game. That thing is rewarding, and it's this almost kind of addendum. So that's why I mentioned that, because there's just a lot. But what is there is so rewarding. It's so fun. But mixing that with some of the graphical issues we're talking about, a 7.5 is a rating where I'm saying this is a very fun game. It's very positive. It is quite a bit to step away from and then come back to and refresh on everything, just because there's a lot to it. That being said, I would be happy to. I would be happy to play this more so that the procedurality of it becomes more second nature. I like plenty of procedural games, but this is one that takes a little more effort to enjoy, but I do enjoy it a lot, and so it's one I could recommend if you like this style of game. So 7.5 is my final score.
All right, I'm going to give this an 8.5. This is one that I think deserves a seal of excellence. There's those few graphical things, but I think that once you learn this game mechanically, it is all there. And that is really what I care the most about. There is, one side note, there's two forms of airship, and it drives me nuts. Because there's the markets and there's the airship that moves around. But okay, that's a side note. On the actual positives of this game, I really enjoy the rondelle action selection, and then that choice that you have to have of when do I want to take the income? When do I want to fire off those inventions? But also let everybody else fire them off. And you get so much more bang for your buck if you're the one who does it, because you have to spend that steam to make them work. But then you also are using that whole action. So I love that balance. I love the positive interaction. I love the deep, crunchy thinking nature of the game and trying to plan out how am I going to make my way around that circle without going terribly in debt with all of the exploitation tokens. And so I just really enjoy balancing that out. And to me, the core and the crux of the game really is balancing that exploitation. And I find that to be very rewarding and very enjoyable.
So it's funny. I mean, I generally agree with what everyone has said so far. I'm going to come in at a 7.5 like you, Chris. You echoed many of my thoughts. And I also understand, Wendy, why I think you like it a little bit better. Because you tend to skew towards the heavier games. And so for me, this is a game where I'm so impressed. I don't think I've played another game by the designer, Danny Garcia. But from what I understand, this is, if not one of his heaviest designs. Is that correct?
I would say so. Arborea is also a little bit there, but it's also a little smoother than this one.
Yeah. So this is pretty high on the level of game that I want to come back and play. But I do actually want to come back and play this one because I think some of the mechanical elements are just brilliant, like really clever, smart things going on. If you're a fan of kind of seeing the interweaving of mechanisms, that's why I think if you are a Lacerda fan, you probably should at least try this game, because it does give me similar feels to the Lacerda games that I've played. And so I appreciate the design. I really enjoy the game, and I do want to continue playing it. I don't necessarily know that I want to teach it very often. And if I have my druthers, and you don't usually have your druthers as a gamer, you have to sometimes just, whoever you're playing with is who you're playing with. But if I was playing this with people who knew the game relatively well, I'd 100% be down. Yeah, let's play, because it can run long. And I don't know if both of you are familiar with this, but when I was doing a little bit of research before this review, there's actually an official variant that the designer has up on BGG that all revolves around the production action, because there's a concern that if particular players kind of spam the production action, get some scoring tiles, inventions in their board, and then just kind of, because you can run it every other turn, and then other people are going to be running it as well, that they can kind of exploit that. And what the designer said is that it lengthens the game, and it also is not a very efficient strategy. So that's something that I think can be kept in mind as well, is that it's a variable length and it can run long. So those are the things that I worry about a little bit, but not enough to not recommend the game. It's one of the smartest Euros I've played in a long time. But it's not terribly intuitive. The scoring especially is not very intuitive. So that's what keeps it from getting to an excellent to me, although, it's a really, really good Euro game. All right. Well, there you go. That is Daitoshi. I'm Mike Delisio.
I'm Chris Yee.
And I'm Wendy Yee.
Have fun generating steam.
Hey everybody, thanks for watching this video. If you like this review or whatever you just watched, wasn't it amazing? Check out our channel, Dice Tower. We have all kinds of things. We review games, we do top 10s, we play games live. It's all about board games, but especially the people who play them. Check out Dice Tower YouTube channel.